Hi, this is Paul Puckett, your host of Getting There and author of Investiphobia, Overcome Your Deepest Investment Fears. You know, we've talked about the 18 fears that lead to Investiphobia, but did you know that every single one of those fears I found not by just doing research or anything, but by sitting across from people who had them? Each one of those fears has 4 or 5 or more people that I've seen with those particular issues. Issues that affect their life as much as their money. Let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite clients 15 years ago who inspired the book. She was a book lover herself, reintroduced me to several authors, loved to cook, gave me recipes. She and her husband had an acre of very well kept but natural looking landscaping with big oak trees, air plants, and all sorts of landscaping of plants that you've never heard of. She actually introduced me to some that are in the yard now. And every time I would come over, we would do a portfolio review of her investments once a quarter. He would never participate. He'd wave at me and head back out in the yard. But she would only participate for 5 or 10 minutes just to see, hey, how are we doing versus the market? Do we need to make any changes? Oh, hey, listen, I've got to tell you about this recipe. You'll love it. Or, oh, hey, have you read? And we'd have fascinating conversations. The meetings usually went 2 hours, and an hour and 45 minutes or more had nothing to do with investing. After I'd worked with him for about 3 years, he passed away. And although I attended the funeral, I didn't know all the details of how he had passed away. I just knew he'd been ill and gone to the hospital, and a few days later had passed away. The next time I went to meet with her, this prim, very well kept, very interesting and fascinating, happy lady was disheveled in a nightgown with a TV that had never been in the living room before, and stacks and stacks and stacks of investment reports, papers, magazines, everything you can imagine. And she was frantic. When I started talking to her, a commentator on the TV show she was watching said after this break, an analysis of a stock that she had, and when they came back on, she asked me to quiet down so she could see, what's going on with that stock. So I didn't say anything in that meeting. I just addressed the issues that she raised, and we talked about nothing but investments for 2 hours. But the next quarterly meeting when I went out, she was the same way, maybe worse. The house was less clean, there were weeds in the garden beds, the yard had not been mown, which I'd never seen at her house. Her hair was messy. She was wearing a nightgown at 2 in the afternoon. And so after a few minutes, I looked at her and I said, Sue, I need to do something. And I know it's probably going to upset you, but I'd ask you to allow me. And she, oh, Paul, what? And I picked up the remote control to the TV set and I turned off the TV. She jerked like she'd been electrocuted. Why are you doing that? I said, Sue, something's happened here. When your husband passed away, up until then we talked about cooking and books, and you looked at the investments and you made sure you knew what was happening, but you didn't really focus on it. Your money's now eating your life, and I'm curious if you realize that and why you're doing it. Well, she started crying, and she said, Paul, I'm responsible for it now. I said, well, you've always been responsible. I mean, you delegated it to us to manage, but you've always been responsible for it. And she said, no. Did I tell you my husband's last words? And I said, no, we didn't talk about it. I know it was a painful thing, and to have him have to go into the hospital at 72 and know that he probably wasn't going to come out. And I know he slipped into a coma. When did he say his last words? And she said, well, right before he slipped into a coma, he was holding my hand and he said, Sue, you're responsible for it all now. And so, Paul, I have to do all this. I'm responsible for it. And I said, Sue, I've known you for 5 years. This is not what he would have wanted. How does anyone know when they're going to say their last words? I think what he meant is he wouldn't be there anymore. Not that you have to micromanage and look at everything and drive yourself crazy. I don't think he would want you to be the way you are now. Do you? She knew that what I was saying was right, but she hadn't really thought about it until then, and she burst into tears. So I let her cry for a few minutes, and then I said, if you're willing, it just so happens I've got a pair of gym shorts and a t-shirt in the car. Why don't I grab those, come back in, we'll move the TV to wherever it used to be, we'll get rid of all these papers and magazines that you've already read that are stacked around, and then if you'll make me a sandwich, I'll mow your lawn. And although she was still crying a little bit, she nodded and she said, I think that would be a very good idea. 3 months later when I came back, we reviewed the investment portfolio just like we had in the old days, 5 to 10 minutes. And then we chatted about a new plant she'd found and a new author she recommended that I read. She lived another 4 years in good health, enjoying her yard, enjoying cooking, enjoying reading. The burden that can be placed on you by a loved one has nothing to do with the money, but it can have a very substantial impact on your life and your money if you fear disappointing the person that left you with that burden. The purpose of the book is to help people like Sue who have these fears many times placed upon them, so that they can get rid of those and live their life with money still being important, but not so important that it eats up their life. Have a great weekend and have fun.